Good morning, good afternoon, good night. This is the very fast The French Revolution Timeline Project Instructions video. Giddy up, here we go. You want to bear several questions in mind while you're working on this project. For example, what were the reasons for the French Revolution starting in France at the time that it occurred? Was it the ideas, or was it the famine, or was it something else? Or was it a combination of the lack of money, the famine, the inequity, the ideas, the Enlightenment? What were the events of the French Revolution and the causes? Why did the French Revolution start, and what were the causes of the French Revolution? How can I evaluate which causes were the most important, and what recommendations can we make to governments to avoid a future revolution? What actions are justified in bringing about change, and how can the French Revolution help us understand solutions to Canadian problems today? So if I slow that down a little bit, you want to make sure that you're showing that the event you're looking at with the quote is important and significant in terms of being a cause or related to the causes of the French Revolution, or an important step in the French Revolution. All right, your quote should also demonstrate your understanding of the event, and your question should demonstrate your understanding of the event and the connections to the French Revolution. So your big poster will be made up of several mini posters, approximately 8.5 inches by 5.5 inches. Each mini poster would have a title, date, image, quote, and question, and then you would have 5 to 10 of these. And you can ask your teacher whether you're working alone or with a partner, and if you're working with a partner, you probably want to be aiming for a higher count of total events. When you're looking for quotes, you need to read an article about your event and then select a sentence from that article. You're demonstrating your ability to select a sentence from an article, and if you bypass that step by using Google to find the quote for you, that doesn't show your ability to find the quote in an article. So make sure you go through the first step to find an article and read an article about the event that you are researching. Evaluation. Can you find quotes in context by reading articles and put the source in brackets after each quote? Ideally, can you find some quotes with some authors? Does your choice of quotes contain important facts and details? Does your choice of quotes demonstrate your understanding about how facts and ideas contributed to the cause of the French Revolution? Can you ask 10 open-ended questions? And also under research skills, can you demonstrate your understanding of your quote connections by your ability to write a question? And criteria C, communicating. Can you create a visual timeline poster that communicates information and ideas that is appropriate to the audience purpose in a visual poster format? Ask your teacher about how he or she or they want you to generate images. Hand-drawn, printed, hand-colored, or a mixture of all the above. Some of the issues or events that you may want to put on your timeline will be clear events with a clear date. And sometimes you may think, I want to put this idea onto my timeline, but how do I put a date to that? Well, you could look at a date that a book was published to try to get an idea onto a timeline. For example, The Leviathan was written by Thomas Hobbes, 1651, which made a case that absolute monarchy is a good thing because it makes society safe. This idea meant that perhaps the English and French kings cling to the idea of power for the kings, which could have been a problem, and that problem could have been one of the factors that pushed towards the French Revolution, as people wanted less power for the kings. That same idea is also echoed in King James, the fourth of Scotland. What he wrote about was absolute monarchy and the divine right of kings. Okay, you could also pick the event where the royal treasury is declared empty, but you could also have events that are where the France spent money. The French government and France spent money and all these things before the treasury was declared empty. For example, France spent money on building Fort Louis in Canada during the 7 Years' War, Fort Louisbourg in Canada during the 7 Years' War, and they spent money on the 7 Years' War. And also, they spent money on the French Revolution. All these things, on the American Revolution. France spent money on the American Revolution, which meant that they ran out of money, and which caused the French Revolution. The beheading of Charles I, 1649, in England could have been considered a possible cause as a precedent, meaning as if the English have put a king on trial for treason and beheaded him, it sets a precedent that this type of activity is possible to consider. Okay, feel free to rewind and pause any of these slides to take a look at these events. The Magna Carta. How is that a cause of the French Revolution? Not directly, but it's inspiration for a possible alternate path. So the French kings want absolute monarchy. Before Louis the 16th, there was Louis the 14th who said, "I am the state." He was also called the Sun King. And so this Magna Carta is suggesting an alternate option, an alternate reality, an alternate possibility, and that could be inspiration where some people in France want that alternate possibility of a constitutional monarchy or some other form of government rather than the absolute monarchy which they have. Therefore, they can look to the Magna Carta, which came earlier, as inspiration for why they are motivated to change their government. Okay, King Louis orders the doors locked. That would be an example of an event that would make an argument that the monarchy in France, King Louis XVI, had poor leadership skills. It did not have the skills needed to solve the problem with diplomacy, solutions, tax reform, and maybe making some more equality in the social structure. Okay, say if you're looking at social contract that Rousseau wrote about, you could pick any of his books for a date to discuss this issue, and then find a quote related to this issue. Discourse on the Origin of Inequality was written in 1755 before the French Revolution, so this could have had an impact on the ideas of France. Okay, here is an example of how to find a quote. You read an article, and then you select a sentence and decide that's the sentence I want to use for my quote. Here's an example. It follows that when any government usurps the power of the people, the social contract is broken. And not only are the citizens no longer compelled to obey, but they have also an obligation to rebel. So this changes the thinking where rebelling, at least people have permission to rebel according to this philosophy. Not everyone agreed with that philosophy. Not everyone agrees that rebelling is a good thing. However, in order for a rebellion and a revolution to happen, people have to think that that action is a good idea. So this idea is a huge catalyst. A catalyst, Google that word if you're not familiar with the word catalyst. It's very similar to cause, but it's sort of a side ingredient that helps things move forward. All right, so say if you want to find a source for this, let me show you how to do that. If you're using Britannica, it's fairly easy. However, if you're not using Britannica, you can't find the author, you can use the title. The title for this article would be The Social Contract in Rousseau. That's what you could use for your source, but I'm going to show you with Britannica how to cite it. Okay, I'm going to move my mouse over and I'm going to hover over this blue button. I'm going to click on Cite, and then you're going to see a citation pop up. And this is going to show you that Britannica itself is recommending to use Britannica Editors as the official source, meaning the author is Britannica Editors. And you could use that as a source. If you feel like that's not enough, you could go further down the line where you put Britannica Editors quotation social contract. That's the title of the article. All right, but you can see there it's giving you a suggestion of what the source is. Feel free to try searching on Britannica yourself. Ask your teacher about how many actual human authors they want you to find. Ask your teacher about what type of websites and sources they want you to avoid. Here's one example project with a total of 8 mini posters on poster paper. Here's another example of a French Revolution timeline project with 12 events, 12 mini posters attached. And I believe this might have been a group of 3 rather than a group of 2 students working on this poster project. Let's take a look at a zoom in here. Let's take a look at this one here called A Famine in Winter in France. Okay, a famine winter in France, 1788. Notice they got a title, they got a date, they have an image, and then below that they have a quote with the authors in brackets after the quote, and then they have a question which reads, how do you think the winter famine impacted the overall stability of the French government during the French Revolution? Straightforward and to the point, there's an example of how to lay out your mini poster. Notice that also this one has different printing than this one, so you can see that it looks like multiple students were working on this together. And if you look down here at the bottom, you can see the initials RS, so students initialed their contribution to the group project. All right, thank you for your attention and good luck on your work. Oh, also check with your teacher about due dates, timelines, and what place to look for due date information, whether it's on Microsoft Teams or somewhere else. All right, good night.